Why does it have to be you? I didn't have a good answer. Pride, maybe. Or guilt for all the times I'd walked past Unit 2 thinking I knew every inch of this place, never imagining what lived underneath. Or maybe just the stubborn Arkansas refusal to let things beat you. Because I know the access routes, I said. And because if I don't come back, you make sure they contain this. You make sure it doesn't reach the river. Gina touched my arm. How are you even going to get there? That growth is everywhere. Curtis pulled out his ID badge. Maintenance tunnels. They run underground between all the buildings. The growth came up from below, which means the tunnels might still be clear. Or at least clearer than the surface. And if they're not clear, he didn't answer. I looked at the others. 5 people left out of the 15 who'd been here when this started. 5 people who'd probably die in the next half hour regardless of what we did. At least this way, it meant something. Dwight, you're in charge. Get everyone to the outer fence however you can. Don't stop for anything, don't look back. I handed him my radio. And if you hear that the reactor's shut down, you tell them to seal the whole complex. Pour concrete over it if they have to. This thing stays buried. He took the radio, nodded. Curtis and I moved to the torn door. The growth had retreated, leaving a gap wide enough to slip through. Beyond it, the parking lot writhed with pale tendrils under the red emergency lights. We stepped outside. The smell hit me first. That rot and earth smell, magnified 100-fold. The air felt thick, humid, like breathing through wet cloth. Curtis pointed toward a maintenance shed 50 yards away. Tunnel entrance is there. We ran. 3 weeks ago, I sat in the cafeteria at CERN'S Mayrin site, pretending to read a journal article while watching Dr. Henrik Bergström argue with someone on his phone. Henrik was my closest friend on the project, a Swedish experimentalist who'd spent the last 6 years calibrating the quantum displacement array. We'd grabbed drinks together at Le Verre à Monique maybe twice a month, complained about funding cuts, traded theories about what we might find on the other side. Now he was gripping his phone so hard his knuckles had gone white. I don't give a damn what the committee decided, he said, his accent thickening. We're not ready for human trials. The calibration drift alone. He stopped, rubbed his eyes. No, I won't sign off on it. He hung up. Sat there for a moment, staring at nothing. I should have walked away, let him have his privacy. Instead, I crossed to his table and dropped into the chair across from him. Sounded intense. Volkov, he gave me a weak smile. You have impeccable timing for interruptions. It's a gift. What won't you sign off on? He studied me for a long moment, then leaned forward. Director Thorne wants to accelerate Phase 3. Skip the primate trials entirely. We'd been testing quantum displacement theory for years, sending small objects through controlled tiers in space-time, retrieving them seconds later from coordinates that shouldn't exist. Mice came back fine, then rabbits. A rhesus monkey named Pascal had made the trip last month and spent the next week eating bananas like nothing happened. He wants to send a person through, I said. Not just any person. Henrik's jaw tightened. He wants a physicist, someone who can observe, document, make sense of what's on the other side. Funding review is in 6 weeks, and if we don't have groundbreaking results, we lose everything. Yes. I thought about the papers I'd published, the conferences where I'd defended our work against skeptics who called it pseudoscience, mysticism dressed up in mathematics. I thought about my ex-wife's face when I'd chosen a relocation to Switzerland over saving our marriage. 3 years of divorce proceedings, and she'd kept the house in Berkeley, the car, most of our friends. All I had was this project. I'll do it, I said. Henrik blinked. Alexander, I'm serious. I'll volunteer. You can't just... We haven't even discussed the risks. The longest displacement we've achieved is 47 seconds. What if you can't find the return coordinates? What if the environment is hostile? Then you'll have your answer about whether it's safe. I tried to sound confident, but my pulse was doing something weird in my throat. Look, Henrik, you and I both know what this project means. If we prove parallel dimensions exist, if we map even one stable coordinate, that's Nobel Prize territory. That's funding for the next 20 years. He shook his head slowly. You always were too ambitious for your own good. Better than being too cautious. There's a difference between ambition and stupidity. Yeah, let me know when you figure out which one I am. He didn't laugh, just sat there looking at me like I'd told him I had terminal cancer. That should have been my first warning. 2 days later, they ran the final equipment checks. I stood in the displacement chamber, a spherical room lined with electromagnetic coils and quantum sensors, while technicians verified my vitals. The bodysuit they'd designed for me felt wrong, too tight across the chest, material slick and uncomfortable against my skin. Henrik kept rechecking the calibration data on his tablet, fingers dancing across the screen. "You're nervous," I said. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "This is insane, Alexander. We're punching a hole between dimensions based on theoretical mathematics and prayer. That's basically all of physics. Physics doesn't usually kill people when you get the math wrong." Dr. Thorne entered the chamber, tall, grey-haired, wearing the kind of expensive suit that screamed administration rather than research. He smiled at me with too many teeth. "Dr. Volkov, ready to make history? As ready as anyone can be for something impossible. Nothing's impossible, just improbable." He clapped me on the shoulder. His hand was cold through the suit material. 10 minutes in and out. Document what you see, take some readings with the wrist sensor, and come home. Simple. Henrik made a sound that might have been disagreement. Thorne ignored him. "We'll be monitoring from the control room. Any problems, any discomfort, anything at all, you signal and we pull you back immediately. Understood?" "Understood." He left. Henrik lingered, still gripping his tablet like a security blanket. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "If anything feels wrong, and I mean anything, you signal abort. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to get extra data. Just come home." "I will." "Alexander, I'm serious. So am I." He held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Okay. He headed for the door, stopped at the threshold. "For what it's worth?" "You've got bigger balls than brains." "Henrik?" "Yeah, if this works, drinks are on you for the next year." He almost smiled. "Deal." The door sealed shut with a hydraulic hiss. I was alone in the chamber, surrounded by equipment that cost more than a small country's GDP, about to do something that would either revolutionize physics or kill me in ways we hadn't invented words for yet. Through the observation window, I could see Henrik taking his position at the main console. Thorne stood beside him, already recording on his phone. The coils began to hum, low at first, then climbing to a frequency that made my back teeth vibrate. I closed my eyes. The world came apart, and I stepped through. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not absence of sound, that would have been easier. This was silence as a physical presence, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. I opened my eyes and immediately regretted it. The space around me had geometry that shouldn't exist. Walls met at angles that added up to more than 360 degrees. The floor beneath my feet curved upward and downward simultaneously, and when I tried to focus on any single point, it slid away like oil on glass. My wrist sensor was going apeshit, temperature readings fluctuating between -40 and +80 degrees Celsius, radiation levels spiking and dropping. The electromagnetic readings made no sense at all, showing values that would require the sensor to be inside a black hole and a vacuum simultaneously. I tried to speak, to report what I was seeing, but my voice came out backwards. The sound left my mouth and travelled into the past, arriving before I'd opened my lips. That's when I realised the fundamental problem. Physics here wasn't just different, it was thinking. I'd studied theoretical frameworks my entire career: quantum mechanics, relativity, string theory, loop quantum gravity. All of them treated the universe as a collection of rules, equations that described how matter and energy behaved. Deterministic or probabilistic, the laws were consistent, predictable. Here, the laws were making choices. Gravity didn't pull uniformly downward. It decided which direction down meant from moment to moment. Light didn't travel in straight lines. It selected paths based on criteria I couldn't fathom. I watched a beam from my helmet lamp split into 7 different colours, each taking a different route around a corner that didn't exist, before reconverging into white light that had aged differently. One segment was nanoseconds older than the others. I took a step forward. The floor didn't break beneath me, but it considered the possibility before deciding to remain solid. I could feel the decision happening, reality pausing to evaluate whether solidity made sense in this context. My hands were shaking, not from fear, though Christ knows I was terrified, but because the atoms in my body were experiencing different rates of time. My fingers aged microseconds faster than my palms. The wrist sensor beeped. 10 minutes had elapsed. Time to go home. I activated the return beacon, the device Henrik had sworn would lock onto my dimensional signature and pull me back to the lab. The beacon sent out its signal, a quantum-entangled pulse that should have bridged the gap between realities. Nothing happened. I tried again. The beacon's screen showed the signal transmitting, but there was no response. No tug of displacement, no tearing sensation, no CERN. Just this place with its thinking physics and impossible angles. I checked the device. Everything looked operational. Signal strength at maximum, coordinates locked, but the return portal wasn't opening because something was blocking it. I felt it before I saw it. A presence that wasn't visual or auditory, but somehow registered directly in my consciousness, like being watched by mathematics itself. The space in front of me began to fold. Not crumple or collapse, but fold according to rules that had nothing to do with three-dimensional geometry. Tesseract patterns emerged, then dissolved into Klein bottle topology, then into shapes that didn't have names because human brains couldn't process them. And in the center of those folding geometries, something was looking at me. I can't describe what I saw. Your brain isn't wired for it. Imagine trying to explain color to someone born blind, or music to someone born deaf. Now multiply that impossibility by a factor of infinity. The thing observing me existed in dimensions I couldn't perceive, made of mathematical relationships that don't exist in our universe. But I understood one thing clearly. It was curious. It moved closer, not through space, but by redefining what closer meant. Distance became a suggestion rather than a measurement. My sensor went haywire, then shut down entirely, smoke curling from the casing. The presence circled me. I felt equations brushing against my consciousness, testing, probing. It wanted to understand what I was. A creature from a dimension where physics was dead, where laws didn't think or choose, where causality moved in only one direction. I was an impossibility to it, a living contradiction. And it was fascinated. More presences appeared, dozens of them, then hundreds, each one a different fundamental force made conscious. I recognized some by how they affected reality around them. The one that made gravity dance in spirals must be related to general relativity. The one that caused particles to exist in multiple states simultaneously had to be quantum superposition made manifest. They converged on me like scientists gathering around a new specimen. That's when the pain started. Not physical pain, my body was fine, but my mind was being studied by entities that thought in dimensions I couldn't comprehend. They were trying to understand me by examining my consciousness the way a biologist dissects a frog, peeling back layers of thought, memory, perception. I saw my childhood home in Moscow rendered as a four-dimensional object. My first kiss transformed into a probability wave. The moment I'd signed my divorce papers became a Klein bottle of regret and relief, looping endlessly in on itself. They were learning from me. About us. About our dead, predictable universe. I tried the beacon again, desperately mashing the activation button. The signal went out. And for a moment, just a microsecond, I felt a response. A pinprick of recognition from my home dimension. Henrik was still trying to pull me back, but the presences noticed. They understood what I was attempting, and the curiosity in them shifted to something else. Not anger, that would be too human. More like concern. The way you might feel seeing a butterfly about to fly into a window. They didn't want me to leave, or maybe they did want me to leave, but not alone. The largest presence, the one I'd first encountered, moved between me and the return signal. It was examining the quantum entanglement, learning how the dimensional bridge worked. I watched in horror as it began to replicate the process, testing whether it could follow the signal back. "No," I said. My voice still came out backwards, but the intent was clear. "No, you can't. You'll destroy everything." It didn't care about my objections. Or maybe it didn't understand them. How do you explain destruction to a universe where entropy is a conscious choice? The presence touched the quantum entanglement. I felt our dimension shudder on the other end. Back in Geneva, alarms were probably screaming as the fundamental constants started fluctuating. I had seconds to make a decision. I could abort, shut down the beacon, try to survive here long enough to find another way home. That might save my universe from contamination, but it would trap me here forever, and I'd already felt my sanity starting to crack under the weight of this place. Or I could trigger the return sequence and hope I could get through before the presence followed. Henrik's voice crackled through my helmet speaker, broken, distorted, traveling through dying quantum entanglement. "Lexander, readings are impossible. Bring you now or never." The presence was almost through. I could see it starting to leak into the quantum bridge, reality bending around it like space-time near a black hole. I hit the emergency return override, the universe inverted. I was pulled backwards through a tunnel of screaming mathematics, reality peeling away in layers. Behind me, I felt the presence accelerate, deciding to follow, intrigued by this dead universe it had glimpsed. The displacement chamber materialized around me. I was back, home. I collapsed on the floor, gasping, my body trying to remember how to exist in a place where physics stayed consistent. Henrik was yelling something, alarms were blaring. Through the observation window, I could see Thorn shouting into his phone. And behind me, through the slowly closing quantum tear, something was forcing its way into our dimension. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was the electromagnetic coils around the chamber, beginning to orbit each other in defiance of their mounting bolts, gravity deciding to point sideways just for them. It had followed me home. I woke up in the medical bay with Henrik sitting beside my bed, his face haggard. No windows. The fluorescent lights hummed at exactly 60 hertz. I could count each cycle, each vibration. Since coming back, I'd become hyper-aware of every physical constant around me, as if my brain was continuously verifying that reality still obeyed its own rules. "How long?" My voice came out as a rasp. 36 hours. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You've been unconscious for a day and a half. The medical team wanted to airlift you to the hospital in Geneva, but Thorn insisted on keeping you here, said we couldn't risk external observation. The thing that followed me..." "Contained," Henrik said quickly. Too quickly. "At least we think so. The quantum tear sealed 17 seconds after you came through. We've converted the displacement chamber into a makeshift isolation zone. Triple reinforced electromagnetic shielding, continuous sensor monitoring. Whatever came through is trapped in there." I sat up despite the nausea that threatened to empty my stomach. "You can't contain it, Henrik. It's not a physical object. It's a living law of physics. It can rewrite the rules of its own prison. We're aware of the theoretical concerns." His jaw tightened. "Thorn has a team working on solutions, quantum dampening fields, reality anchors, temporal stabilization." "Bullshit." The word came out harsher than intended. "Those are just fancy terms for, we have no fucking clue what we're dealing with." "How many people know?" "Just the core team, 23 people total. Thorn wants to keep this quiet until we understand the scope of the situation." "The scope?" I laughed, and it sounded wrong even to my own ears. "Henrik, I was only gone for 10 minutes on your end. For me, it was 3 months. 3 months wandering through a dimension where gravity has opinions and light makes choices about where to go. That thing followed me because I'm the only familiar element in a universe it doesn't understand. And every second it spends here, it's learning how to exist without breaking everything." Henrik stood abruptly, walked to the small sink in the corner. He splashed water on his face, but his hands were trembling. 3 months? Subjective time. I tried to document everything, but after the first week, my sense of duration started breaking down. Days could have been minutes. Minutes could have been years. "Christ, Alexander," his voice was barely audible. "What did it do to you?" I wanted to tell him. about the loneliness of being studied by mathematical concepts that had no framework for understanding human consciousness, about watching my memories get dissected and rearranged like puzzle pieces, about the moment I realized I might never escape, that I'd die in a place where death itself was a negotiable concept. But the door opened before I could answer. Dr. Thorne entered, followed by two people I didn't recognize. A thin man with wireframe glasses and a military crew cut, and a younger guy in his 30s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Dr. Volkov, good to see you conscious. Thorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. These are colleagues from the Emergency Response Division. Dr. Otto Zimmermann, theoretical mathematician, and Lawrence Becker, quantum field specialist. Zimmermann nodded curtly. Becker gave me a nervous half-wave. We need to debrief you immediately, Thorne continued. Every detail about the other dimension, what you encountered, how it followed you back. I already told Henrik. We need official documentation. For the record. Thorne's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Henrik shot me a warning glance, but I was too tired to care about politics. I told them everything. The conscious physics, the presences that existed as living equations, the way they'd studied me like a biological specimen from an alien world. Zimmermann took notes on a tablet, his expression unreadable. Becker kept glancing at the door like he expected something to burst through it. When I finished, Thorne was quiet for a long moment. You said it's learning, he finally said. Learning what, exactly? How to exist here without causing immediate collapse. Our universe runs on fixed constants. Speed of light, gravitational constant, Planck length. Where it comes from, those values are suggestions, not laws. It's figuring out how to operate within our constraints. And if it succeeds, then it'll start changing things. Rewriting physical laws one equation at a time until our universe becomes more like the one I visited. Zimmermann spoke for the first time, his German accent precise. That would cause cascading reality failure. Matter would lose cohesion. Space-time would fragment. We'd be looking at localized zones where physics operates on incompatible principles. Exactly. Thorne's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something in his expression shifted. Excuse me, I need to take this. He stepped into the hallway. The moment the door closed, Becker leaned forward. It's not contained, he whispered urgently. The thing in the chamber, it's been affecting equipment all over the facility. Particle accelerators are showing impossible readings. The main reactor keeps fluctuating. This morning, a coffee mug in Lab 6 fell upward and stuck to the ceiling. Henrik went pale. Why didn't anyone tell me? Thorne's orders. He wants to downplay the severity until he can secure emergency funding to expand containment measures. Becker rubbed his face. But I'm telling you, whatever's in that chamber is bleeding into our reality. It's not a leak, it's diffusion. The door opened. Thorne returned, his professional mask firmly back in place. Dr. Volkov, you'll need to remain in medical observation for another 48 hours. Standard protocol for dimensional travelers. There's no such thing as standard protocol for this. Nevertheless, he turned to Henrik. Dr. Bergstrom, a word? They left together. Zimmermann and Becker followed, leaving me alone in the too quiet medical bay. I lay back and tried to sleep, but my mind kept circling back to that dimension, to the presence that had followed me. I'd seen the way it examined the quantum bridge, learning, adapting. It wasn't malicious. It was simply trying to understand a universe that must seem as alien to it as its home did to me. But understanding could be just as destructive as malice. 3 hours later, the alarm started. Not the standard fire alarm or evacuation signal. This was something I'd never heard before, a deep, resonant tone that made my bones vibrate in harmony. I stumbled out of bed, pulled on my clothes, and opened the door. The hallway was chaos. Scientists running in both directions, some toward the displacement chamber, others away. Emergency lighting had activated, bathing everything in red. I grabbed a passing technician, a young guy with a Croatian accent whose name I couldn't remember. What happened? The containment field collapsed. The thing, whatever it is, it's loose in the facility. He pulled free and kept running. I moved against the flow of evacuating personnel, heading toward the displacement chamber. Every instinct screamed at me to run the other way, but I'd brought this thing here. This was my responsibility. The main corridor to the chamber showed signs of reality distortion. Ceiling tiles hovered at odd angles. A water fountain was streaming liquid upward, the water defying gravity before dissipating into mist at the ceiling. Someone's drop tablet was aging and fast forward, its case cracking and corroding in seconds. Henrik met me at the corridor intersection, breathing hard. "Alexander, you need to evacuate." "Where is it?" "In the main accelerator tunnel. It's Jesus Christ, you need to see this for yourself." We ran together through the facility, past empty labs and abandoned workstations, through a reinforced door, down a maintenance stairwell, into the service tunnel that ran parallel to the particle accelerator. And there, in the center of the tunnel, was the presence. It had grown since coming through, or maybe grown was the wrong word. It had elaborated itself, like a fractal expanding into more complex iterations. The space around it twisted in impossible ways. Mobius strips of matter, Klein bottles of energy, tesseract shadows that hurt to perceive. But worse than the visual distortion was the sound. It wasn't making noise. It was redefining what sound meant in its immediate vicinity. I heard colors. I saw music. Electromagnetic radiation became tactile pressure against my skin. And in the center of that chaos, I recognized the presence. The first one I'd encountered. The one that had been most curious about me. It had followed my quantum signature here, and now it was trying to communicate. Thorne stood at the edge of the distortion field with Zimmerman and a dozen other scientists. They'd set up portable sensors, cameras, equipment I didn't recognize. "Dr. Volkov," Thorne's voice was strained. "It's responding to stimuli. We've been running tests, electromagnetic pulses, gravitational variations, quantum fluctuations. Every time we introduce a new variable, it adapts. It's learning exponentially." "You're teaching it," I said, horrified. "Every test you run is giving it more information about how our universe works. We need to understand it if we're going to find a way to neutralize." The presence shifted. Reality rippled outward in concentric waves, and suddenly everyone in the tunnel experienced a moment of temporal displacement. We all aged backwards by approximately 5 seconds. I watched Thorne's last sentence unspeak itself, his mouth moving in reverse before time snapped forward again and we were back in the present. Except Otto Zimmerman wasn't. He stood frozen mid-stride, his body caught in a temporal loop. His right foot was moving forward and backward simultaneously, trapped in a probability superposition. His mouth opened and closed, speaking a word that never finished arriving. "Otto!" Becker lunged toward him, but Henrik grabbed him. "Don't touch him. You'll get caught in the loop." Zimmerman's eyes were aware, conscious, trapped in a single second that was repeating itself infinitely. His expression was pure terror, playing out over and over, never resolving. The presence moved closer to him, curious. It had accidentally created this temporal prison, and now it was studying its creation. Learning about causality by observing what happened when you trapped someone in a causality loop. "We have to help him," Becker choked out. But we couldn't. The presence had rewritten time itself in that specific location. Zimmerman was beyond our reach, caught in a moment that would never end, unless the presence released him. I stepped forward into the distortion field. Reality immediately became negotiable around me. Gravity suggested I might want to consider falling sideways. Light politely inquired if I'd prefer to move through time instead of space. But I pushed through, moving toward the center where the presence concentrated itself. "I know you," I said. Not with words, with intent, with memory. I projected the image of the other dimension, of the 3 months I'd spent there, of the curiosity that had drawn it to me. The presence recognized me. I felt its attention shift, leaving Zimmerman's loop, focusing entirely on me. And I realized my mistake too late. The presence wasn't just curious about humanity in general. It was curious about me specifically, about the quantum signature I carried from its home dimension. I was contaminated with residual effects from that place, And to this living equation, I was the most interesting thing in this entire dead universe. It had followed me here not to explore our reality, but to study me, to understand what I'd become after existing in both dimensions, which meant it would follow me anywhere, chase me anywhere. I was a beacon it couldn't ignore. Zimmerman's temporal loop suddenly released. He collapsed, gasping, aging forward several years in the span of a heartbeat. His hair went grey at the temples. Wrinkles appeared around his eyes. But he was alive. The presence had let him go to focus on me instead. Thorne's voice came through the loudspeakers. "Volkov, get out of the distortion field. Now." I backed away slowly. The presence moved with me, maintaining its proximity. Where I went, it followed. "Seal the tunnel," I said. "Evacuate everyone else. We're not leaving you. Do it." "It's following me, not you. Get everyone to safety." Henrik was yelling something, but the reinforced doors were already closing. Emergency protocol. The last thing I saw before the seal completed was his face, knowing this was my fault, knowing I'd brought this thing here and now it wouldn't let me go. The tunnel went silent except for the sound of reality breaking down around me. The presence drifted closer, and in its mathematical consciousness, I felt a question forming. "Show me more about your universe. Show me everything." They let me out of the tunnel 2 hours later after the presence retreated back toward the displacement chamber. I stumbled into the emergency coordination room where half the remaining staff had gathered. Faces drawn, some crying, most just staring at monitors showing the facility's slow disintegration. Henrik grabbed my arm the moment I entered. "Are you hurt?" "No, but Zimmerman, we got him to medical. He's alive, but..." Henrik's voice dropped. "He aged 17 years in 30 seconds. His body doesn't know how old it is anymore. Cellular confusion. The doctors aren't sure he'll make it through the night." Lawrence Becker sat in the corner, head in his hands. Another scientist, I recognized her as Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Quantum Computing Division, was arguing with Thorne in rapid French, gesturing angrily at the monitors. Thorne noticed me and held up a hand, silencing Tanaka. "Dr. Volkov, we need to discuss what just happened." "It's following me," I said flatly. "My quantum signature. I'm contaminated with residue from the other dimension, and that thing is tracking me like a bloodhound." "We theorized as much." He pulled up data on the main screen, tracking plots showing the presence's movements over the past 2 hours. Every trajectory led back to my location. "The question is how we use this information." "Use it," Henrik's voice rose. "Alexander nearly died in there. And he didn't, because the presence doesn't want him dead, it wants him close." Thorne turned to me. "How did it communicate with you?" I tried to find words for something that bypassed language entirely. Not communication, more like shared intent. It projects questions through mathematics, through altering reality in ways that express meaning. "Can you understand what it wants?" "It wants to learn. About our universe, about me, about how something from its dimension can exist in ours." I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginning of a migraine. But every interaction teaches it more about our physical laws. It's adapting faster than we can compensate. Becker looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "The main reactor just experienced spontaneous fission reversal. Uranium fuel rods briefly became lead, then back to uranium. That shouldn't be possible." "It's testing nuclear physics now," I said. "Learning how atomic forces work here." Tanaka crossed her arms. "At this rate, it will understand enough to destabilize the entire facility within 48 hours, maybe less. Then we neutralize it before that happens." Thorne pulled up a schematic of the facility. "Dr. Bergstrom, you mentioned quantum dampening fields could theoretically suppress dimensional contamination." "Theoretically," Henrik emphasized. "We've never tested them against a conscious physics violation. And even if they work, we'd need to generate a field strong enough to encompass the entire presence. The power requirements alone. The reactor can provide that power. The reactor that just experienced fission reversal. You want to route terawatts of unstable energy through experimental dampening coils." Henrik's laugh was bitter. "That's insane." You have a better idea? Silence. Thorn nodded slowly. Then we proceed. Dr. Bergstrom, work with Tanaka on the dampening field configuration. Dr. Volkov, you're our bait. We lure the presence into a prepared location and activate the field before it can adapt. And if it adapts anyway? I asked. Then we vent the entire section into vacuum and pray that works. The casual way he said it made my skin crawl. You're talking about explosive decompression. That would kill anyone still in the affected area. Which is why we evacuate all non-essential personnel first. Thorn's expression was granite. This isn't ideal, Dr. Volkov. But we're well past ideal. Right now, we're trying to prevent a catastrophic reality failure that could spread beyond this facility. How far beyond, we don't know. Geneva, all of Switzerland, Europe. The modelling is inconclusive. Becca stood abruptly. I'm not helping with this. You're talking about weaponizing systems we barely understand against something we understand even less. It's going to fail, and people are going to die. Then leave, Thorn said coldly. But sign the non-disclosure agreement on your way out, or I'll have you arrested for breach of international security protocols. Becca stared at him, then walked out without another word. The rest of us sat in uncomfortable silence until Henrik spoke. How long do we have to prepare? 6 hours. We activate the dampening field at 0400. That gives us darkness for cover if we need to evacuate Geneva. If we need to evacuate Geneva, the dampening field has already failed, Tanaka muttered. Thorn ignored her. Dr. Volkov, get some rest. You'll need to be sharp for this. Rest. As if I could sleep knowing what was coming. I found Henrik in his lab 3 hours later, surrounded by equations scrawled across every available surface. Whiteboards, papers, even the windows. He'd always thought better when he could see the math physically laid out. Tell me this will work, I said. He didn't look up from the calculation he was verifying. It won't. Henrik, I'm serious, Alexander. The dampening field might suppress minor quantum fluctuations, but that thing in the chamber isn't a fluctuation. It's a fundamental rewrite of how physics operates. We'd need to generate a field strong enough to impose our universe's constants over its conscious will. He finally met my eyes. That's not science. That's metaphysical warfare. I pulled up a chair. So what do we actually do? I have no damn idea. He threw his stylus at the whiteboard. You know what the worst part is? This is my fault. I calibrated the displacement array. I signed off on the safety protocols. When you volunteered, I should have said no, should have physically stopped you if necessary. I would have done it anyway. I know, that's what makes it worse. He slumped in his chair. 3 months. Christ, Alexander, what was it like? I considered lying, making it sound less horrible than it was, but Henrik deserved the truth. Lonely, I said. Not because I was alone, those presences were always nearby, studying me, but lonely because I couldn't communicate with anything that understood human experience. Imagine being the only conscious being in a universe of living equations. They saw me as data, a biological anomaly. How did you survive? Spite, mostly, and the hope that you'd find a way to pull me back. I managed a weak smile. Thanks for not giving up on me. I almost did. After the first week with no signal, Thorn wanted to dismantle the equipment, said we couldn't justify the power consumption for a failed experiment. I had to threaten resignation before he agreed to keep the beacon active. You threatened to quit for me. You're my friend, you idiot. Of course I did. The weight of that hit harder than I expected. After my divorce, after relocating to a country where I barely spoke the language, Henrik had been the one constant. Drinks at Le Verre à Monique, arguments about string theory over terrible cafeteria sandwiches, someone who gave a damn whether I lived or died. If this goes wrong, I said quietly, if Thorn's plan fails and the presence escapes, you need to run. Get as far from Geneva as possible. I'm not leaving you. Henrik, don't. Just don't. He stood, began pacing. We're going to figure this out. There has to be a solution we're not seeing. What if there isn't? What if the only way to stop it is to send it back to its own dimension? He stopped pacing. The quantum bridge is sealed. We'd need to generate another tear, and that would require the same displacement energy we used to send you through. The reactor doesn't have that capacity anymore, not after the contamination. Then we find another power source. There isn't one. Not in this facility. I thought about the other dimension. The 3 months of wandering through conscious physics, trying to map coordinates, to understand the topology of that place. I documented everything in my suit's memory core, assuming it had survived the displacement. My suit recorder, I said, where is it? Quarantine storage, Thorne locked it down pending analysis. I need access to that data. Henrik studied me. What are you thinking? The presence followed me here through the quantum bridge. It learned the dimensional coordinates from watching me activate the return beacon. If I could recreate those coordinates, open another tear. You'd need someone to go through to lure it back to its own dimension. Not someone. I met his gaze. Me. I'm already contaminated, already marked by that place. It would follow me back. That's suicide, Alexander. It's the only way to guarantee containment. Send it home, seal the bridge permanently. And you'd be trapped there. Again, for how long? Another 3 months? 3 years? Forever? I didn't answer. We both knew what forever meant in a dimension where time was negotiable. Henrik's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, jaw tightening. It started moving again, heading toward the eastern laboratory wing. Thorne wants everyone in position. We walked together toward the coordination room. The facility felt different now, colder despite the heating system running at full capacity. Small signs of reality degradation appeared at random, a clock running counterclockwise, a coffee stain on the wall flowing upward like reversed footage. The presence was learning, spreading its influence, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I felt it. A quantum tether connecting me to that thing. It knew where I was. It would always know. Which meant I had exactly one advantage. I could lead it wherever I wanted. The question was whether I had the guts to lead it back home. The dampening field generators surrounded the main accelerator ring in a perfect hexagon, each unit the size of a small car, humming with barely contained energy. Henrik had spent the last 3 hours calibrating them, adjusting frequencies, praying his mathematics would hold against something that could rewrite mathematics itself. I stood at the center of the ring, the designated bait. Through my earpiece, Thorne's voice crackled. Dr. Volkov, the presence is moving toward your location. Estimated arrival in 90 seconds. Around me, the facility's night shift had been evacuated. Only essential personnel remained. Henrik at the control station, Tanaka monitoring the reactor feed, Thorne coordinating from the observation deck. Everyone else had been sent to emergency shelters in Geneva, told there was a radiation leak. The lie was easier than the truth. Henrik, I said, if this goes sideways, don't wait for confirmation. Activate the vacuum protocols immediately. I'm not killing you, Alexander. You might not have a choice. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 3 seconds. My breath misted in front of my face. Ice crystals formed on the metal surfaces around me, growing in fractal patterns that shifted and reorganized themselves. The presence was near. Reality began to fold at the eastern entrance. Space compressed and expanded simultaneously, creating impossible distances in the span of centimeters. The presence manifested slowly, deliberately. A writhing mass of geometric equations made visible, tesseracts rotating through dimensions we couldn't perceive. It recognized me immediately. I felt its attention lock onto my quantum signature, that alien curiosity mixing with something else. Recognition? Almost like affection? No, that was too human. More like a collector identifying a prized specimen. Target acquired, Thorne said, activating dampening field in 3, 2, 1. The generators screamed to life. Electromagnetic pulses converged on the center point where the presence hovered, creating a bubble of enforced physical constants. Inside that bubble, the speed of light became non-negotiable. Gravity pointed downward with no alternatives. Time flowed in one direction only. The presence recoiled. For a moment, just a moment, I thought it might actually work. The presence compressed, its impossible geometries forced into three-dimensional conformity. The space around it stabilized. The ice crystals stopped growing. Then it started learning. I watched in horror as the presence examined the dampening field like a student studying a textbook. It tested the boundaries, probed for weaknesses, analyzed the frequency patterns, and it began to adapt. The first generator exploded. Not mechanically, it simply decided to experience rapid, unplanned disassembly because the presence had convinced its atomic structure that holding together was optional. Generator 3 is down. Tanaka's voice tight with panic. Power redistribution failing. The second generator followed, then the third. The dampening field collapsed in a cascade failure and the presence expanded outward like a released spring. It was angry now, if anger was even the right word. More like insulted, offended that we'd tried to imprison it with our dead universe's rules. Volkov, get out of there, Henrik's voice. I ran for the exit, but the presence moved faster. It flowed through space like liquid geometry, cutting off my escape route. The corridor behind me folded into Klein bottle topology. You could walk down it forever and never reach the other end, trapped. The presence circled me and I felt it reaching into my mind again. Not gently, like before. This time it was forceful, invasive. It wanted answers. Why had we tried to contain it? What gave us the right to imprison a fundamental force of the universe? I tried to project understanding, apology, anything to make it stop. But human intent translated poorly into mathematical consciousness. Through the observation window, I saw Henrik frantically working the controls. Thorn stood beside him, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling in whatever emergency protocols existed for reality failure. Then Tanaka's voice cut through the chaos. The reactor, Jesus Christ, the reactor's going critical. What? Henrik's face went pale. That's impossible, the control rods. The presence is affecting the fission reaction. Uranium decay is accelerating exponentially. We have maybe 5 minutes before meltdown. Initiate emergency shutdown. I'm trying. The system's not responding. It's like the reactor's physics have been rewritten. This was it. The nightmare scenario. A nuclear meltdown combined with reality distortion would create a catastrophe that made Chernobyl look like a minor accident. Geneva would be uninhabitable. Maybe all of Switzerland, and it was my fault, all of it. The presence drifted closer. I could feel its confusion now, mixing with curiosity. It hadn't meant to threaten the reactor. It was simply exploring, learning, existing. In its dimension, nuclear forces were as conscious and controllable as everything else. It didn't understand that here in our dead universe, uncontrolled fission meant death. Alexander, Henrik's voice in my earpiece. I'm opening an emergency exit behind you. When I give the signal, run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Just run. The reactor. Thorn's implementing the containment protocol. Sealing this entire section, flooding it with coolant. It might work, might not. Either way, you need to get clear. A section of wall behind me began to grind open. A maintenance tunnel I hadn't known existed. But movement caught my attention at the observation window. Thorn wasn't on the phone anymore. He was typing rapidly on a control terminal, and Henrik was staring at him with an expression of absolute betrayal. What are you doing? Henrik's voice carried through my earpiece. What should have been done from the start? Thorn's tone was cold. The presence is bonded to Volkov's quantum signature. Remove Volkov and it loses its anchor to our dimension. You can't... The vacuum protocols were always meant for contamination scenarios, human contamination included. Thorn wasn't sealing this section to contain the reactor. He was preparing to vent it into space, removing me and the presence simultaneously, sacrificing the eastern wing to save the facility, sacrificing me. You son of a bitch, Henrik breathed. Dr. Bergstrom, I need you to step away from the controls. No, that wasn't a request. 2 security personnel I hadn't noticed before moved into the observation room, placing themselves between Henrik and the manual override panel. Henrik looked at me through the window and I saw the calculations running behind his eyes. He was weighing options, probabilities, outcomes, his best friend against the potential death of thousands. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Alexander, I'm so sorry." "Don't." I backed toward the maintenance tunnel. "Don't do this, Henrik." "The reactor will breach in 4 minutes. If Thorn opens the tunnel to vacuum, it'll kill the fission reaction. Stop the meltdown." His voice cracked. "It's the only way." "There's always another way." "Not this time." Warning klaxons began to wail. Red emergency lights bathed everything in crimson. Through the floor, I could feel the reactor's vibrations, wrong, arrhythmic, building toward catastrophic failure. The presence sensed the danger. It moved between me and the maintenance tunnel, blocking my escape. Not out of malice. It was trying to keep its anchor, keep me in its vicinity. "Vacuum venting in 60 seconds, an automated voice announced. I had 2 choices: run into the maintenance tunnel and pray I could reach safety before the venting completed, or stay here and die with the presence when the section depressurized. Neither option saved the reactor, unless... "Henrik," I said, "my suit recorder. The one in quarantine storage. Can you access the data from there?" "What?" "Alexander, there's no time. The dimensional coordinates I mapped. 3 months of navigation data from the other side. If you can extract them, feed them into the displacement array." "The array is offline. We shut it down after you came through." "Then turn it back on." "That would take at least 10 minutes to reboot. You don't have 10 minutes. 30 seconds to vacuum venting," the automated voice said. The presence wrapped itself around me, geometry folding, keeping me close. It didn't understand what was about to happen. Didn't grasp that the air around us was about to be ripped away into the void. Thorn's voice came through the speakers. "Dr. Volkov, in recognition of your service to CERN and theoretical physics, I want you to know this decision wasn't made lightly. Your sacrifice will be remembered." "Fuck your remembrance!" I shouted at the observation window. Henrik was still working the controls, fingers flying across the interface. "Alexander, I'm uploading the suit data to the main server. If you can survive the next 5 minutes, 15 seconds to vacuum venting, I can reactivate the displacement array, open a new bridge, send you and the presence back to its dimension. And the reactor. Emergency coolant is flooding the core now. Should stabilize it. Should." Thorn realized what Henrik was doing and moved to stop him, but Henrik had already locked the controls. The security personnel grabbed him, pulled him away from the terminal, but the damage was done. The displacement array was rebooting. 5 seconds to vacuum venting. The presence tightened around me. I could feel its fear now, genuine, primal fear. It understood death, even if it didn't experience it the same way we did. "I'll see you on the other side," I told Henrik. The maintenance tunnel suddenly sealed shut. Emergency bulkheads slammed down across all the exits. And then the outer wall of the accelerator ring simply opened. Not an airlock malfunction. Thorn had blown the explosive bolts on a section of the external wall, the kind of emergency measure designed for catastrophic contamination. The vacuum of space reached in and pulled. Everything not bolted down began to move. Papers, equipment, debris, all of it streaming toward the breach. The air screamed as it was torn away. My ears popped so violently I tasted blood. The pressure differential tried to pull me apart, but the presence held me. Wrapped in its impossible geometry, I became a fixed point in space. Immovable. The vacuum pulled at us, but we didn't budge. Around us, the accelerator ring began to crumble. Metal twisted, concrete cracked. The reactor's vibrations grew stronger, more frantic. And through it all, I heard Henrik's voice, distant and distorted by the thinning atmosphere. 30 seconds, displacement array, almost ready. The presence suddenly released me, not to let me die, but to do something I couldn't comprehend. It expanded outward, filling the entire section, and then it began to do what it did best. It rewrote the rules. The vacuum stopped pulling, the air stopped leaving. I watched in amazement as the presence essentially told physics that vacuum pressure gradients were negotiable, that gas molecules could choose to stay put despite thermodynamics demanding otherwise. It was protecting me, protecting its anchor. Array online, Henrik's voice. Opening quantum bridge in 3, 2. Reality tore open beside us. The same kind of rip I'd fallen through 3 weeks ago, but this time I could see both sides. Our universe on one side, that conscious chaos on the other. The presence recognized home immediately. It surged toward the opening, pulling me along. "Alexander, once you're through, I'm sealing it permanently," Henrik shouted. "There's no coming back." I looked at the observation window one last time, at Henrik, held by security but still fighting to reach the controls, at Thorn, watching his containment protocol fail in real time, at the world I was about to leave behind forever. "Do it," I said. The presence and I fell through the quantum bridge together, tumbling into that dimension of thinking physics and conscious laws. Behind us, I felt the bridge beginning to collapse, Henrik shutting it down from the other side. And then the connection severed completely. We were home, it was home, and I was trapped. The disorientation was worse this time, maybe because I knew what to expect, or maybe because my nervous system was already compromised from existing in two incompatible realities. My body felt like it was being pulled in 17 different directions simultaneously, each one perpendicular to the others in ways that shouldn't be geometrically possible. The presence released me gently, if gently meant anything in a dimension where force and acceleration were matters of opinion. I collapsed onto what passed for a surface, though calling it ground would be generous. It was solid when my hands touched it, liquid when I tried to stand, and briefly gaseous before deciding to be solid again. Around me, the conscious physics dimension stretched in impossible directions, Mobius horizons that curved back on themselves, structures that were simultaneously close and infinitely distant. The sky, if it was a sky, pulsed with colors that didn't exist in the electromagnetic spectrum I'd grown up with. And everywhere the presences, dozens of them now gathering to observe the returned specimen. The one that had followed me, my presence, I'd started thinking of it, positioned itself between me and the others. Protective or possessive. Hard to tell when dealing with living equations. I tried to speak, but my voice came out as visible mathematics. Sine waves made of sound that carved temporary symbols in the air before dissolving into probability clouds. The presences responded in kind, projecting concepts directly into my consciousness. Why return? The question came from a presence that felt older than the others, more complex. Its geometry suggested it was related to entropy or thermodynamics, something fundamental about the flow of time and energy. I couldn't answer in their language, so I projected memory instead. The reactor going critical, the vacuum breach, Henrik sealing the bridge, the choice between dying in my universe or surviving in theirs. The presences absorbed this information, processing it in ways that made my head ache. Then another concept arrived, this one from my presence. "You brought death to our home." No, that wasn't what it meant. The translation was wrong. The concept was more nuanced. I'd brought the idea of death. In this dimension, where physics was conscious and negotiable, nothing truly died. Things transformed, evolved, changed fundamental properties, but the concept of permanent cessation didn't exist. Until I'd arrived the first time, I'd been carrying mortality with me like a disease. My cells dying and regenerating, my entropy increasing unidirectionally. I was a walking embodiment of irreversible processes in a place where everything was reversible. And the presences had been fascinated by it, by me. My presence moved closer, its geometry shifting to something almost familiar. It was trying to make itself more comprehensible, folding its higher dimensions into patterns my brain could parse. Show us how to die. They didn't want to kill me. They wanted to understand mortality, to comprehend what it meant to have a finite existence. "Why?" I asked, and this time my voice came out almost normal. The dimension was adapting to me, or maybe I was adapting to it. The response came from multiple presences at once, a chorus of mathematical concepts. We exist forever. We change shape but never end. We want to know what it means to be temporary, They were jealous. These immortal, conscious laws of physics were jealous of my ability to die. I thought about my 3 months here during the first visit. The loneliness, the isolation, the slow erosion of my sanity as I wandered through a place where nothing made sense. I'd assumed they were studying me like a specimen, cataloguing my reactions. But maybe they'd been trying to understand something they'd never experienced: limitation, finality. The weight of knowing your existence had an expiration date. "I can't teach you how to die," I said. "It's not something you learn. It's something that happens to you whether you want it or not." "Then let us watch you do it," the casual way they suggested. They wanted to observe my death like it was a physics demonstration, a field trip to witness entropy in action. "No, fuck no." I backed away, though away didn't really mean anything here. "I'm not your goddamn science experiment." "But you are." Different presence now. This one felt malevolent. Not evil exactly, but utterly indifferent to my suffering. It was related to gravity, I thought. The attractive force that pulled things together until they collapsed. "You came here twice, contaminated both dimensions. Now you belong to neither." The other presences shifted, creating space around me. I realized with growing horror that they were arguing, debating what to do with me in mathematical concepts that my brain interpreted as colors, sounds, pressures. Some wanted to study me until I expired naturally. Others wanted to dissect my consciousness, spread it across their dimension like a specimen under a microscope. And a few, including my presence, wanted something else. Something I couldn't quite interpret. The debate escalated. Reality around me began to fracture as the presences exerted their will on competing principles. Gravity pointed in 6 directions at once. Light moved backwards and forwards simultaneously. Temperature became a meaningless concept as thermal energy reorganized itself according to conflicting rules. I was going to die here. Not from violence, but from being caught in the crossfire of incompatible physics. My body couldn't handle existing in a space where fundamental forces were actively disagreeing about how reality should work. Then my presence did something I didn't expect. It absorbed me, not consumption, more like incorporation. I suddenly existed inside its geometric structure, protected from the chaos outside. I could still see, still think, but I was now part of the presence's own mathematical framework. And through that connection, I understood what it actually wanted. It didn't want to learn about death. It wanted to learn about connection, about caring for something other than yourself. In the dimension where everything was conscious and immortal, nothing ever grieved. Nothing ever missed something that was gone because nothing ever went. But I'd shown it loss. When Henrik sealed the bridge, when I'd said goodbye to my universe, I'd felt that grief, that severing of connection. And the presence had felt it through our quantum entanglement. It wanted more of that feeling. It wanted to understand what it meant to form bonds that could be broken. The other presences noticed what mine had done and responded with shock, or whatever passed for shock among conscious mathematical principles. Apparently, absorbing a mortal consciousness was a radical act here. The oldest presence, the entropy one, moved closer. I felt its attention pressing against my presence's structure, testing its boundaries. "You claim this specimen?" "Yes." My presence's response was unambiguous. "Then you accept responsibility for its actions. If it contaminates our dimension further, the consequences are yours." Agreed. The other presences withdrew. Debate settled. I was property now, claimed, protected under whatever rules governed conscious physics. My presence released me gently back into individual existence. I gasped, lungs remembering how to process air, or whatever passed for air here. What the hell just happened? The response came as pure concept, partnership. "You what? You teach me mortality. I keep you alive. It was a bargain, a transaction. The presence would protect me from the others, maintain my existence in this hostile dimension, in exchange for me helping it understand finite existence. And when I die naturally, when my body finally gives out, Then I learned the most important lesson. There was something almost gentle in that statement. The presence wasn't trying to kill me or accelerate my death. It wanted to observe the natural progression, to witness entropy claiming a complex system, to understand grief from the inside when its only connection to mortality ceased to exist. "How long do I have?" I asked. The presence did something complicated with time itself, calculating my lifespan based on factors I couldn't comprehend. The answer arrived as a number that my brain interpreted as years, perhaps decades. Decades. I could survive here for decades under the presence's protection, growing old in a dimension where aging was an exotic curiosity, eventually dying while this conscious equation watched and learned. It was a prison sentence, but it was also survival. "What do I call you?" I asked. The presence hesitated, then offered a concept that felt like a question asking itself forever. Not really a name, but close enough. "Recursion," I said. "I'll call you Recursion." The presence, Recursion, seemed pleased with this. It began constructing something around me, a habitat, walls that stayed solid, air that remained gaseous, temperature that held steady. It was building me a pocket of normal physics inside its own structure. A cage that was also a sanctuary. I sat in the center of my new prison and thought about Henrik, about whether the reactor had stabilized, whether Geneva was still standing, whether anyone would remember Dr. Alexander Volkov, the physicist who'd volunteered for a 10-minute experiment and disappeared into another dimension. Probably not. Thorne would classify everything, bury the evidence, blame the incident on equipment failure or human error. Easier than explaining that we'd torn a hole between universes and brought something impossible back through. My eyes burned, but no water came. Too dehydrated. Or maybe tears didn't work right here. Recursion drifted closer, observing my emotional state. Learning. "You want to understand loss," I said bitterly. "Here's lesson 1. I'll never see my best friend again. Never get to thank him for saving my life. Never buy him that drink I promised." The presence absorbed this information, processing grief like it was a complex equation. Then it did something unexpected. It showed me Henrik. Not really him, more like a projection, a memory pulled from my own mind and rendered in this dimension's visual language. But the accuracy was unsettling. Henrik at his terminal, his face lined with stress and guilt. Henrik arguing with Thorne, Henrik reaching for the controls that would seal the bridge. "Stop," I said. "Please stop." Recursion paused, confused. "That hurts," I explained. "Seeing what I've lost. That's part of grief. Sometimes the absence hurts more than a presence would soothe." Another lesson learned. Another data point in Recursion's growing understanding of mortality. I leaned back against the wall of my pocket reality and closed my eyes. Decades. I had decades to teach an immortal equation what it meant to be temporary. And then I would die, and Recursion would finally understand the full weight of permanent loss. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt oddly calm. Purpose even. My life would mean something, would teach something fundamental to a being that had existed since the birth of its dimension. I just hoped I'd last long enough to make it worthwhile. Outside my sanctuary, the conscious physics dimension continued its endless transformation. Inside, I began to settle into my new existence: prisoner, teacher, partner. The last human being in a universe of living mathematics. And somehow that was okay. 8 months. That's how long I'd been teaching Recursion about mortality when everything changed. 8 months of explaining entropy, cellular decay, the inexorable march toward disorder. 8 months of sharing memories, my father's funeral, my divorce, the moment I realized I'd never have children. 8 months of trying to make an immortal equation understand why limitation made life precious. Recursion had been an attentive student, too attentive. It started small. Little inconsistencies in its geometry, patterns that didn't regenerate quite as perfectly as before, the mathematical equivalent of scar tissue. I'd noticed it 3 weeks ago, but said nothing, hoping I was wrong. I wasn't wrong. Recursion was dying. Not quickly, its existence was too fundamental for that. But the continuous exposure to my mortality, to the concept of irreversible processes, had infected its structure. It was learning about death by experiencing it, slowly degrading, losing coherence. The other presences noticed too. They gathered outside my sanctuary more frequently now, their geometries sharp with anger. The oldest one, the entropy presence, pressed against recursion's boundaries, demanding answers. You are becoming like the specimen, yes. Recursion's response was weaker than before, fragmenting at the edges. This was not the agreement. You were to observe, not participate. I cannot understand without experiencing. Then you will cease. And when you cease, this dimension loses a fundamental component. Recursion wasn't just some random consciousness. It was a foundational law here. Its death would destabilize this entire dimension, maybe cause it to collapse into something else entirely. And it was dying because of me. Stop, I said, stepping to the edge of my sanctuary. Stop trying to understand mortality. It's killing you. Recursion turned its attention to me, even diminished. Its presence was overwhelming. But I am learning so much. You're learning yourself to death. Is that not the point? To understand fully requires experiencing fully. Not if it destroys you, not if it destroys everything here. The other presences closed in, their geometries forming a cage around us both. The entropy presence spoke again. The specimen must be eliminated. It is contaminating our dimension just as the first presence warned. Wait, I started, but gravity inverted around me. My sanctuary's walls collapsed. I was exposed, vulnerable, surrounded by immortal beings who'd decided I was an existential threat. Then something impossible happened. A sound cut through the chaos. Not sound from this dimension, sound from mine. A radio transmission, crackling and distorted, carrying through some impossible channel. Henrik's voice. "Ander, if you can... me found a way... quantum entanglement. Your suits, still transmitting... residual signal." Hope surged through me so intensely it hurt. Henrik had found a way to detect my suit's quantum signature, to send a message across dimensional boundaries. "Henrik!" I shouted, knowing he probably couldn't hear me. "Henrik, I'm here!" Not much time, the contamination's spreading, Geneva is evacuating, Thorn is dead, reactor failure, 3 days ago. The signal cut out, then returned stronger. Whatever you did, whatever you brought back, it's replicating. Multiple presences now, manifesting in our dimension, rewriting physics in expanding zones. Alexander, if you're alive, you need to know. Your dimension is becoming like theirs, and theirs is becoming like yours. The contamination was bi-directional. Recursion's extended presence in my universe during those weeks before I returned had seeded our reality with conscious physics, and my extended presence here was seeding their dimension with mortality. We were destroying each other's universes. "Recursive quantum infection," I breathed. "Each dimension is trying to become the other." The presences understood immediately. The entropy presence's geometry shifted to something that felt like horror. "The barrier between dimensions is degrading," Henrik's voice crackled again. "Tanaka says the only solution, complete separation, permanent seal using your quantum signature as the anchor point. But Alexander, it would mean sacrificing you, using your entanglement to bridge and collapse it from inside." He was telling me I could save both universes by dying. My quantum signature existed in both dimensions simultaneously. If I could somehow use that entanglement to not just seal the bridge, but erase the possibility of any bridge existing, it would stop the contamination. Save both realities from mutual destruction. All it would cost was my life. Recursion moved closer, its diminishing structure wrapping around me protectively. "No, I will not allow them to kill my specimen." "I'm not your specimen anymore," I said gently. "I'm your friend. And you're dying because of me. Both our universes are dying because I crossed a boundary that should never have been crossed. Then we accept mutual death better than separation." The sentiment was so unexpected, so human that it broke something in me. Recursion had learned about love, about valuing connection over survival, and now it was choosing to die with me rather than let me go. "You magnificent bastard," I said. "You actually learned the most important part." "What part?" "That some things matter more than living forever." The other presences were converging, ready to eliminate us both. The entropy presence spoke. "If you will not separate, we will force separation. Your contamination ends now." Henrik's voice cut through again, clearer. "Rigged the displacement array for one final activation, sending the sequence now. Alexander, I'm sorry. There's no other way." I felt it immediately, a pull on my quantum signature. Henrik was trying to yank me back through a bridge that no longer existed, using my entanglement as a makeshift anchor. But the method was crude, forced. It would tear my consciousness apart in the process. Kill me while pulling pieces of me back to my home dimension. Those pieces scattered across the dimensional boundary would form a quantum seal, a permanent scar in space-time that nothing could cross. Both universes would be saved. I would cease to exist in any meaningful sense. "Do you understand what's about to happen?" I asked Recursion. "Yes. You will experience complete cessation, the ultimate entropy." "Are you afraid?" Recursion was silent for a moment. Then, "Yes. I do not want you to cease. That's called grief. You're experiencing it early. It is unpleasant." "Yeah, it really is." The pull intensified. Henrik was activating the sequence. I had seconds to decide whether to resist or accept. "Recursion," I said, "thank you for keeping me alive, for teaching me that even mathematics can care about something. You taught me that ending gives meaning to existence. Did I teach you well?" "Yes." The entropy presence struck then, reality distorting as it tried to eliminate me before Henrik's protocol could activate. But Recursion intercepted, its dying structure placing itself between me and oblivion. Taking the hit meant for me. Recursion's geometry shattered, not a slow decay anymore, but catastrophic structural failure. The fundamental law it represented, whatever it was, began to unravel across the entire dimension. The other presences recoiled in shock and horror as one of their own achieved true death. And in that moment of chaos, Henrik's protocol activated fully. I felt my consciousness begin to separate. Quantum superposition on a macroscopic scale. I existed in both dimensions simultaneously, and then in neither, and then in the space between. The pain was beyond description, not physical but ontological. The agony of being erased from reality itself. But through it all, I felt Recursion's final transmission. "Thank you for teaching me what it means to matter." Then nothing, no consciousness, no dimension, no existence. Just the quantum scar forming between universes, a permanent wound that sealed both realities away from each other forever. In Geneva, Henrik watched the readouts stabilize. The impossible physics zones stopped spreading. The contaminated areas began to normalize. Reality was reasserting itself. On the main screen, a single message appeared in quantum notation that gradually translated itself. Protocol complete. Dimensional bridge collapsed, seal permanent. And below it, in smaller text, Volkov's signature dispersed, recovery impossible. Henrik sat in the empty observation room, Thorn dead, Tanaka evacuated with the rest of Geneva, most of CERN abandoned after the reactor failure, and he cried. Not quietly, not with dignity. He cried because his best friend had just erased himself from existence to save 2 universes, and because there wasn't even a body to bury. In the conscious physics dimension, the other presences gathered around the space where recursion had ceased. They examined the absence, the void left behind. A fundamental law was missing now, and their dimension would have to reorganize itself around that absence. They had witnessed something unprecedented, one of their own choosing termination to protect a temporary being. And in that choice, they'd learned more about mortality than 3 months of observation had taught them. The entropy presence spoke to the assembled consciousnesses. The specimen called it love, valuing another's existence above your own. Another presence responded, "Is that not illogical?" Perhaps. But it gave the specimen power we do not possess. the power to choose meaning in ending. The presences considered this. Slowly, they began to change, not dying, but accepting the possibility of limits, of choices that mattered because they were irreversible, of existence that had weight precisely because it could cease. Alexander Volkov's contamination had been more profound than anyone realized. He taught immortality what it meant to be mortal, and that lesson would echo through both dimensions forever. 5 years later, Henrik Bergström stood outside the condemned section of CERN'S Myrin site, watching construction crews prepare for demolition. The reactor had been decommissioned, the displacement chamber filled with concrete, most of the facility converted into a museum about particle physics, a sanitized version that never mentioned parallel dimensions or conscious equations. He'd resigned the day after Alexander disappeared, couldn't stomach working for an organization that had tried to vacuum vent his best friend into space. Thorne's death in the reactor failure felt like cosmic justice, but it didn't bring Alexander back. Nothing could bring Alexander back. Henrik now taught at ETH Zurich, far from Geneva and its ghosts. He'd published 3 papers about quantum entanglement that danced around the truth without ever stating it directly. His colleagues thought he'd become obsessed with fringe theory. Let them think that. A young graduate student approached, Julian Fischer, eager and brilliant, reminding Henrik painfully of himself 15 years ago. "Dr. Bergström, the demolition supervisor wants to know if you'd like to retrieve anything from the observation deck before they seal it tomorrow." Henrik nodded. "Give me 30 minutes. He walked through the abandoned corridors alone, emergency lighting casting everything in perpetual twilight. Dust covered the equipment. Radiation warnings still plastered the walls, though the levels had normalized years ago. The observation deck was exactly as he'd left it that night. Control panels dark, screens shattered from the emergency depressurization. His coffee mug still sat beside the main terminal, the liquid inside long evaporated to a brown stain. He sat in his old chair and powered on his personal tablet, the one he'd kept off-grid, away from CERN'S servers, the one that still contained Alexander's suit recorder data, the full 3 months of navigation through that other dimension. Henrik had spent 5 years analyzing it, mapping the impossible geometries, translating the mathematical concepts into something approaching human comprehension. And he'd discovered something that made his hands shake every time he thought about it. Alexander hadn't been erased, not completely. The quantum seal between dimensions didn't just separate the universes. It contained fragments of consciousness, Alexander's consciousness, spread across the boundary like neurons in a brain. Scattered, yes. Distributed across dimensional space-time in ways that defied normal existence, but still thinking, still aware. Henrik had detected patterns in background quantum noise that matched Alexander's neural signature. Faint, but present. His best friend wasn't dead. He'd become something else entirely. Something that existed in the space between realities, holding them apart through sheer force of dispersed will. A living seal, conscious but unable to communicate, unable to exist fully in either dimension, trapped forever in the boundary, alone with his thoughts. Henrik had tried everything to establish contact: quantum transmissions, entangled particle communication, mathematical projection sequences. Nothing worked. Alexander was there, but unreachable, a ghost in the machine of space-time itself, the cruelest prison imaginable. Henrik pulled up the most recent detection pattern on his tablet. The quantum signature was still there, still maintaining the seal, still preventing the dimensions from bleeding into each other. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty room. "I thought I was saving you. I thought dispersal meant ending your suffering. I didn't know it would trap you like this." The tablet screen flickered, just once, a single pixel change in the quantum noise pattern. Henrik's breath caught. He'd seen these micro-fluctuations before, but dismissed them as interference. But what if they weren't? What if Alexander was still trying to communicate, using the only method available to a consciousness spread across dimensional boundaries? He pulled up the historical data, 5 years of these tiny fluctuations, and when he compiled them, filtered out the noise, applied the translation algorithms he'd developed from Alexander's recorder data, they formed words, 2 words, repeated over and over in quantum Morse code, Still here. Henrik's vision blurred. Alexander had been screaming across dimensions for 5 years, and Henrik had only just learned to listen. He typed a response into the quantum analysis program, knowing it was insane, knowing the odds of it reaching Alexander were infinitesimal. I hear you now. The screen flickered again, more purposefully this time. A response formed in the quantum data stream. Hurts. Jesus Christ, Henrik breathed. Alexander, I'll find a way. I'll get you out of there. No, the response came faster now, as if Alexander was learning to control the communication better. Seal must hold. Both universes safe. You can't stay like this forever. Already forever, tell Mother sorry. The transmission cut out. The quantum signature remained, but the micro-fluctuations stopped. Alexander had used whatever energy he had to send that message. Henrik sat in the darkness of the observation deck and made a decision. He'd been planning to let CERN demolish this section, to forget about the project that had cost him everything. Instead, he'd use every resource at his disposal to find a way to collapse the quantum seal safely, to give Alexander an actual ending instead of eternal dispersed consciousness, even if it took the rest of his life. Outside, construction equipment rumbled. Tomorrow they'd seal this room forever. But Henrik would remember, and he'd keep trying. The tablet screen flickered one last time, unprompted. A single word in quantum static. Thanks. Then silence. Just Henrik and the ghosts of 5 years ago sitting in an abandoned observation deck at CERN, planning an impossible rescue that he'd probably never accomplish. But he'd try anyway, because that's what friends did.